All right, we're going to finish up our trig unit with graphing. We're going to start with sine and cosine. If you look at this unit circle right here, which you should be familiar with, this unit circle shows you at 0 degrees that the x value is 1. So over here on a graph, this function f of x, at 0, you can see the y value is 1. And that 1 is the x value of the unit circle. At 90 degrees, which we also know is pi over 2, the x value is 0. So you can see that we're plotting all the answers for x, basically, on the unit circle. So all the x values over here, pi is the same as 180 degrees. At pi, we're plotting -1. And at 270, which is 3 pi over 2, we're going to plot 0. So that's what's happening. At pi, we're plotting -1. And at 270, or 3 pi over 2, we're plotting 0. And you will notice at 2 pi, you're right back to 0 degrees, right, which is 360, which is also 2 pi. And the answers start to repeat themselves. So this is the cosine graph. This is f of x equals cosine of x, or y equals cosine of x. Or I guess you could say y equals cosine of theta. It really depends if you're labeling this theta or if you're labeling it the x-axis, okay? So there's your cosine graph. I do want to start to learn the vocabulary. So we will be talking about the high points being the crest, the low points being the trough. The line that splits it into 2 equals halves is being called the midline. So all these things are going to come up in your first desmos assignment. Now in your student.desmos assignment, this is your first question. Basically, you're just reading about how to create the sine curve. These are also the same ordered pairs off the unit circle. And then there's a review question about coterminal. So hopefully you remember what coterminal means as you do your desmos. Now, in addition to the student.desmos, there's going to be a Deltamath on this to practice. So let's first look at this lovely trig curve. This could be sine or cosine depending on where you start, but we do see the domain since it keeps repeating over and over again. The domain is all reals, but you'll notice that the range has a high and a low, right? This range has a high, it looks like a 5, and it looks like it has a low of 3. So you would write that the range is 3 to 5. So this is something that you already know, and just wanted to make sure you are clear on that. Even though it's a new graph, we can use our old material about domain and range. Now, the first word that's new vocabulary is called midline. So midline is, again, what splits it into 2 equal halves. So what's in the middle of 3 and 5 will tell you your answer. So there it is. At 4, you have your midline. So you can write y equals 4 is your midline. The next type of vocabulary word is amplitude. Now before we do that, go ahead and find the domain and range of this graph. You can hit pause if you need to. So the domain goes on forever and ever, and the range went from -3 to 5. We can actually still answer the midline, the old question. Now it's considered, well, not really old, we're just starting the word. But on the last slide, I should say, midline was what's in the middle of 5 and -3. So you could add them up and divide by 2 to find their average, if that helps. And so that midline should have been at, I do believe, 1. Now you can check if the midline is 1, y equals 1, by seeing how much did it go up and down from the midline. So this went up 1, 2, 3, 4 up, 1, 2, 3, 4 down. So I do have the right midline because I'm going up and down the same amount. Now the amount that you go up and down is called the amplitude. That's the second vocabulary word. Amplitude is always an absolute value answer, so it's always positive, and it's how far you go up or down from the midline. So if we went back and wanted to see what would be the amplitude of this graph, how far did we go up and down from the midline? We went up and down 1 from the midline. Okay, and the third and final new word is going to be the period. The period is how far you go before you repeat yourself. So first, let's review our domain and range. Go ahead. Looks like the domain and range is all reals again, and it going from -4 to +4. The midline again, go ahead. What's exactly in the middle? period, we might as well do that again. I'm sorry, the amplitude. How far from the middle did you go up and down? All right, so the new word is now period. The period is how far before you repeat yourself. So if you look at the start of a crest and you go down, you keep going down, you're turning, you're going up, and notice it's not until you get here that it would start to repeat itself. And so if that's the distance you're going from a value of 0 for x to, this case, 4 pi. So that is called your period. It's how far a full cycle is. It's not always going to be 4 pi, but it's always going to be from one point to another point that things start to repeat themselves. So here, let's try this period. So here, if I started here, I do not see me repeating until I am here. And so that's why the period, in this case, how far did I go on the x values? I went from 0 to 2 pi. And that is called the period, which is actually 2 pi is the period for most sine and cosine graphs. It's only when you start changing the coefficient of x that will be changing the period. So these are all things to think about as you do your desmos and then practice on your Deltamath. Keep in touch and let me know how you're doing.